Welcome to I Have Some Questions. The show is all about asking questions our guests have never asked themselves before, never thought about, or been too afraid to explore. It's designed to uncover the human story at the root of successes and failures and help us as an audience learn and grow from that story. My hope is that you'll hear brilliant guests exploring new ideas and challenging themselves in new ways of thinking. I think this makes for great conversations. I'm going to bring on entrepreneurs, authors, coaches, scientists, and frankly, any vein of super interesting, successful, and passionate human I can find. I am fascinated by passionate people, and I have some questions for them. I'm Erik Berglund, and I hope you'll join me every week for new episodes. My next guest is Dr. David Nickelson. David is a clinical psychologist and an attorney by training. He's really spent most of his career focused on healthcare and really trying to improve all aspects of patients, providers, and supplier relationships. But he started his career as a science fellow in the United States Congress. And in the mid-90s, he was able to draw from his rural upbringing to successfully make the case for federal reimbursement for telehealth services to rural communities across the country. We saw this recently rear its head again, right? When COVID came, most of the platform that was expanded during COVID and for chronic care management and other platforms came out of the work that David did to bring Congress together to pass legislation to reimburse this. And since he had that awesome experience combining his medical background as well as his legal background to get that legislature drafted, he's really gone into business and he's built multiple companies along the way. He's acted as a coach and an advisor and a board member. There's not many people you meet that are genuine polymaths who are really capable and competent in multiple spheres like David is. And I had such a fascinating conversation with him. He's now spending his time very interested on AI governance, on adoption and integration and operations, and really trying to help bring about AI safely into business and healthcare and relationships. I hope you'll join for this interview with David Nickelson. David, I'm so excited to have you here. You are a man who has done many different professional things and combined them in really unique and interesting ways. And there's so many different areas to unpack. But one of the tidbits you shared with me is that way back in the mid-90s, you were involved in a process for telehealth, basically allowing telehealth to be something that was discussed and then either standardized on or a bill was passed or something through Congress. And I think that's really fascinating to pick up on because we still struggle with telehealth. My wife's in the healthcare field, and I can think back to COVID and her trying to facilitate telehealth meetings with patients with heart failure in a way that would be reimbursable for insurance. And that is still clear as mud today. I wonder if we could go way back to that day and just tell a little bit of the story of what that was like for you at that time in your life, and maybe anything you have to share about telehealth in general, since that happened so long ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I was extremely lucky. As I came out of graduate school, I knew that I didn't want to take the traditional paths that would be for someone with the dual degrees that I had earned, for a clinical psychologist and an attorney. And was really looking for something different. I happened upon Congressional Science Fellowships that were offered through my professional organization, the American Psychological Association. By hook or by crook, I ended up going to Congress, where the fellowship allows you to work for any senator or legislator, House member that you want, providing scientific support and information. I'm from Minnesota, farm boy from Minnesota. The North Dakota folks and the Minnesota folks were all really, sort of akin to people I knew. Ended up working for the senior senator from North Dakota. And he said, here's what I need. I need somebody to get Medicare to start to pay for telehealth, telemedicine services back to rural communities. Because we got all these rural communities where most of the kids are moving away and most of the people who remain are elderly and need additional support. I said, I get it. If the strategy is if we can get them to pay for just a tiny little bit of a rural communities effort, the commercial insurers will open up and we'll get it going. So I spent a year and a half in Congress running a joint advisory group across both the House and Senate. In those days, it was the technology was crude. You had giant rigs that had to get rolled into somebody's office for the cameras, big Cisco rigs. You had to have T1 lines in order to do anything at high enough fidelity to matter. We did an event on Capitol Hill where we ran 14 T1 lines into a conference and committee room and did an all-day demonstration of the different kinds of technologies, both here and around the world. It was an amazing effort. And because I was both go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. That had to be no mean feat in 1995, right? Yeah. Today, it's easy to picture. Sure, we put a teleprompter in there in Zoom, and it was fine. And no, this didn't. The Cat 5 cables were barely a thing that you could use to rely on to consistently get anything to happen.
Yes, the one of the big learnings was sort of power and authority, and how power and authority can work on your behalf if you use it wisely. And that is, if you call and say, I'm calling from the senior senator from North Dakota's office, he's the highest ranking member of the, CMS committee, people call you back. They don't know who you are. They don't care. They just heard that. And so it wasn't easy, but it was also, you could get access to people who would say, oh, sure. AT&T said, we'll run the lines. We'll have them thereby and we'll drop them, get us in touch with the architect. We'll have them where you want. It was really a wonderful time to do that. And because I was both a clinician and an attorney, I had the ability to go craft the legislative language myself and work with Leg Counsel to actually write the bill, which was tremendously fun. It was sort of, you can go back to all your buddies in law school and say, yeah, what are you doing? I drafted, part of 42 CMS. And that was a blast. And so we were lucky enough to do it. We passed it. I stuck around and helped write the regulation for a short period of time. And that's really when the commercial insurers then followed suit within about 18 months. And then the beginnings of the industry took off. And then, interestingly enough, when COVID came, 25 years of hard work on behalf of the advocacy community suddenly had a place to go. And we saw, 8 years of change happen in 8 months. It was amazing. It's one of the highlights of my career was to have the opportunity to help that many people that broadly, and be involved like that. The leadership lessons that were gained from working with that kind of authority, with the different party members, the different committee members, the different mindsets, urban and rural, all the professional associations who had an interest and would lobby regularly for inclusion or exclusion. It was an education like nothing else. And it's been one of the most important things I think I've ever done in terms of not just putting my professional skills to work, but also, the interpersonal skills and the advocacy skills that were part of, what I learned, but never really applied in that kind of a setting. Tons of fun.
Yep. To your point, what a great way to cut your teeth. You learned all this theory and this great knowledge and may have been good at some stuff, but you had to come in and put it to use in a pretty complicated dynamic. I mean, you mentioned one aspect of it. That's the ability to wield that authority and drop that name and leverage that advantageously. But also, when you're at the head of something like that, talk about a position where you have to influence without authority. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could get maybe a vendor, supplier, customer, or company to do some things. But at the same time, to get that type of bipartisan legislature explored and crafted and passed, you probably had to learn some other lessons about how to be influential without having any clout at all yourself. What did you learn, and how did that play out in the rest of your career?
Well, one of the things I learned is that, the unique integration that just came with the dual degree that I earned, to be able to speak cogently to the clinical side of service delivery in a healthcare setting, whatever that is, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health, or even some of the supply chain and other things that relate to health. Those were things that I was deeply familiar with because I'd worked in multiple clinical settings, big and small, as I was doing my training. Additionally, because of the work that I did as an attorney, both with, did a little ambulance chasing for somebody and then also did some large firm work, I had a pretty good idea of how to combine those things in a unique way. One's really just the understanding of human behavior from a scientific perspective, and the other is really the application of it to collective rule systems, structured, coordinated rule systems. If you think about it at that level, you have a rule that's trying to encourage a particular behavior or trying to diminish a particular behavior, whether it's criminal, federal, whatever it would be. And then the sort of process that you go through is, well, does the science actually back that up? Does this rule actually encourage the kinds of normal behavior change that we would expect someone to engage in if they were confronted with this rule? And many times, and we've seen this emerge over the last 20 years in many of the books about cognitive bias and the fact that people are irrational economic actors. This was an idea we were playing with in the early 90s, but it sort of emerged in the last couple of years in a meaningful way. People don't always do what you think they're going to do based on what the rule is and how it's structured. So human behavior is this unique combination of, social and personal and political and legal and regulatory, and being able to speak to that in a cogent way to the kinds of people that I've consulted on behalf of over the years has been a unique skill. I can talk to the head of cardiology. I can talk to the head of mental health. I can talk to the finance folks. I can talk to the lawyers in the legal and regulatory team. I can problem solve across multiple areas and speak multiple languages, if you will, inside of those groups. And that's really important because that in-group, out-group conversation, that belief that you have the authority to speak because you know the language or you know the rules, it's critical wherever you can find it. And that's been a unique skill. And I think it's something I naturally come to. I like that kind of integrative thinking and multidisciplinary thinking. But it's not always something that comes easy to other folks, or folks don't exactly know what to do with it when they see a unicorn like me.
That unicorn would be a great way to put it. I mean, the picture that's coming to mind is that overlapping Venn diagram that you laid out pretty clearly of psychology and law, which frankly, I don't think many of us would have ever thought of that way. How do people act and what are the rule systems they are part of? Or that's absolutely what you studied, but that's pretty clear insight on how those two things overlap. Then for you layer in business acumen, which is what you've developed over the last 20 years of your career, 25 years of your career. That truly is a unique three-layered set of three lenses that you can view a situation through.
Yeah.
How aware were you? If you go back to that 1995 bipartisan, how aware were you of the uniqueness of that and that you were tapping into this underlying synergy that those two backgrounds had at the time versus how much of it was frankly figuring shit out because you were just out of college and had to get something done? Like what can you attribute it to?
One of my buddies has termed it the MIU philosophy to moving forward, and that's making it out.
That's a good way to put it.
That coming out of Congress at the time that I did, many of the offers that I was receiving were to go ahead and be a lobbyist for various organizations that I had worked with across the period of time that I was there because I had the network and the connections. But that was not a thing that I thought I would be good at or be interested in. And so, what I caught the bug for was, that was also the dot-com boom. That was when, Fast Company and some of those magazines were like, as thick as an old Sears robot calendar or catalog. I know I'm giving my age away, but they were, pets.com, that whole era of big money in the beginning of the dot-com boom was also sort of floating around underneath all of this. And I was enormously excited by, well, how do you combine business and behavior, particularly for regulated systems as we go into building whatever this Internet 1.0 is going to be. And so that was probably as cogent as I had of an understanding, but I was also, again, I have been uniquely lucky in the opportunities that I've had. My dissertation chair, who then was also the head of one of the large groups at the American Psychological Association, said, "Hey, you kind of do weird stuff. I got this weird idea." And he said, would you come help me set up a 501c6? And then what if we built an electronic business and we sold electronic products and we made a bunch of money that we could use for advocacy on behalf of the profession? He's like, "Could you do that?" And I have no idea, but I'm happy to try. And that's what we did. I went and created the new advocacy organization. We invented our own version of an e-business providing support for HIPAA regulation. At that time, the HIPAA regulation was just rolling out. and across the profession, as you can imagine, for particularly psychology, issues of security and privacy are paramount. And so the interest from our membership, as well as the need for some guidance about how to comply with those regulations, was enormous. So I literally was given the opportunity to start a business without any oversight, by myself, providing an electronic product. And so over the course of the next couple of years, we learned with my team how to do that, how to, I had my server down the hall. What is now Adobe Experience Manager. I had install number 8 of the old Day Communique, the underlying software.
Wow.
Nobody knew what it was. We had it. We built an electronic workbook that we could fulfill across the wire and send by DVD. I mean, it was all along, and I invented the marketing process, and so I had this opportunity again to be in a place where I had a lot of conversations with the broader CMS and the broader health community about electronic service delivery. I had the opportunity to help create a business based on everything I'd learned in Congress and everything I'd learned in school, and constantly was sort of looking at, particularly at the marketing and outreach communications piece, and thinking, because I had a marketing consultant, I'm thinking, oh my God, marketing is just these guys. There's no science. My God, we could put a little science under this and maybe do a little better job. And that's what sort of then started to pull me towards, thinking about online behavior, thinking about online engagement, thinking about digital engagement, crossing between bricks and mortar and back to digital, just to better understand what the parameters of that are, how people absorb that information, how they made decisions, and sort of took me there. And then I had to recreate myself entirely, because the American Diabetes Association, where I had an opportunity to build an even bigger business, basically said, well, we don't care about you being a lawyer or a psychologist. We just think you're a marketing person. Come be a marketing person. So I recreated myself as a marketing person, and grew their business. I think we tripled it in 3.5 years, and then left to go into the digital agency space in some capacity, because the skills that I'd been able to learn were easy conversation. It was easy to have conversations with folks in the healthcare space and say, look, you need the combination of skills that I have in order to really find the kinds of patient engagement, clinician engagement, and business results that you're looking for.
You used the comment that you were lucky. I want to zoom back to that, because that's obviously not the case. Granted, you maybe put yourself in some situations to be exposed to the right people, and you were fortunate in the way some of those things manifested. I want to come back to that in a second, but real quick, with what you built on telehealth, was that the foundation of chronic care management? Is that kind of do you know what that is? And is that kind of the origin story of that CMS program? Some of it.
And certainly some of the outreach that you can do electronically with that program comes directly out of that. So
fascinating.
Some of the primary applications that we used early on were, of course, diabetes, obesity treatment, and then also some of the orthopedic specialties and radiology specialties, because they were very image-based and it was easier for them to adapt quickly to the kinds of opportunities that were out there.
That makes sense. I have a strong understanding and background in chronic care management due to a failed business endeavor a number of years ago. And
I'm sorry.
Man, what a powerful system that is, and what an absolute pain in the ass to implement, execute, sell, all those things. So that's cool to understand that that's maybe where the origin of it started.
Yeah.
So let's go back, because you made that comment about being lucky, and I appreciate the humility associated with that. And then at the same time, you intentionally set yourself up to have ways of thinking that were marketable and valuable, and then you just happened to find the problems you could apply it to. You already had the experience in healthcare, and there were loads of problems in healthcare where that type of structured thinking could be valuable. Marketing, just happened to be one of them. If you were to flip roles a little bit now, and you were an advisor to young professionals, college students, maybe post-grads who are trying to figure out, what are the rare skills and ways of thinking that are going to serve me potentially in the same way that your ways of thinking overlapped and served you to solve current problems? Any advice you'd have?
The big buzz everywhere is AI, and certainly that's what all of my mentees right now are sort of asking about, is what does this mean for for the future. And there is a particular article that I point them back to. It's a long one, but it's easily found. It's called AI as Normal Technology. And the basic premise of the article is that, AI is similar to the internet, it's similar to radio, it's similar to television in the sense that it's a new technology that does really interesting things. But the human systems that need to absorb that technology and figure out how to create value from that technology have not emerged. And it takes, because, my saying all the time is, it's a digital world. We're analog beings. We don't change that fast. The panic and the hype is not necessarily something that you should buy into, because the human skills of how do I translate this technology into something that creates value or makes meaningful change in the world or creates revenue streams it's not emerged, and it won't for some time. And so there's opportunities for them to think about, okay, how do the interpersonal skills that I have obtained, if I'm someone in the psychology space, what are the interpersonal skills and human behavior skills that I've learned that I can apply to helping folks better understand how to use these technologies? On the legal side, what are the ways that you can make that work more efficient? What are the ways you can make that work more effective? What are the ways you can, quickly do the initial research that you need? And then what is the unique component that you as an individual thinker can add to that? I think, don't panic. There is an opportunity for you to put your skills to work. Is it a tough time? Yes, as everybody contracts to try to figure out what's next, and they hang on to their cash, they hang on to the roles, or they try to just do an efficiency play. We're all going to hurt. But I think, having lived through this twice really with the internet, it's going to emerge, and there's going to be an economic and skills-based engines that they can apply to. So, stay the course of what your core skills are, and then pick up skills that give you an understanding of what this broader space is going to be. And that I haven't changed that over time in talking to folks. I think it's, the hallmark for me has always been able to take those things and create a narrative, even if it's a new narrative. I mean, I come from a long line of, charlatans and con men and salesmen. So maybe that's where it comes from. But I've always been able to recraft the narrative with core skills at the heart. The person skills, the people skills, the system skills, the academic and applied skills, and then tell a story that says, and you have this problem, and these skills apply this way.
I think that I have that article pulled up, and we'll link to that. I believe I at least saw that. I may have read the whole thing. I don't know. As I pulled it up over here, it looked familiar. But I think your concept of AI as normal technology, their concept that you're sharing, makes a lot of sense in context. And at the same time, I would reiterate my question. Like, you can, in hindsight, look backwards and go, man, my understanding of the overlap of clinical psychology and law gave me a unique perspective that allowed me to penetrate healthcare in a unique way that had value. That's cool. Maybe you weren't fully aware. Maybe it wasn't perfectly intentional at the time, but in hindsight, that's pretty clear. Those were valuable skills and ways of thinking for you to have. And the anxiety created around this emerging technology is very real. And so I'm curious if there are any specific ways of thinking that you see as going, that's going to be helpful crafting the applications of normal technology right now. I'll share what I think is one that isn't very helpful, that I think we're quickly having to abandon. And that's believing that gated knowledge and relying on a skill that gates knowledge from you to your customer seems to be a dying model. And so, for example, I was at coffee this morning with a workout buddy, and he's a serial entrepreneur, and he was telling me about an app they're creating in a particular space, veterinarian, that takes all of the current research that exists out there and puts it in the hands through a very specifically trained AI trained on your pet to help you not panic and not have to rush to the vet clinic all the dang time. And that's just an application of solving a gated knowledge problem that we used to build entire systems on. And so that's something we're rapidly having to abandon in different industries. Can you identify any others, or maybe any specific ones you're like, ooh, that way of thinking is probably going to be valuable for the foreseeable future?
Well, I absolutely agree with that premise. I mean, they're, mentoring younger students right now. I can't advise anyone to go get a PhD or a PsyD in this profession unless they have, very specific career goals. Do you want to be a professor or a researcher, or do you want to be, an independent clinician who can build their own business inside of bigger regulatory systems? Otherwise, there's no way that the 2 degrees together that I earned right now would be valuable, because both of them are gated information communities that are rapidly and easily being accessed in other ways. And that's neither good nor bad. The advice that I give to the students around those kinds of things is you need to learn to think exceptionally critically. You need to be able to absorb processes and approaches and figure out how to make them better, different, operate in ways that will be more valuable to your end customer, and will also be better for, overall human goodness and wellness. I mean, if you're here doing it, you might as well do it for the right reasons. And that's I go back to the 80-20 rule. 80% of what we do with the basic information now is all going to be able to be done to a degree by some kind of AI tool, ungating those large information communities. However, there is no way that the judgment and creativity of a human being can be recreated by those at this point. Even most of the reading that you do about, if there's going to be an overall advanced general consciousness or general intelligence, it's going to miss that analog piece of human beings. It's a deep component of who we are, how we think, and how we evolved. And so, cultivate that. Look at, arts and music, and look at the things that help you create something new, or interact differently or better with other people, and cultivate those things, because those are the skills that are going to be most in demand or most missing. You can take a big piece of research and provide it back to somebody. But if what they really need is a plan for how to do it, and they need someone with the skills to actually operationalize that, probably one of the other hallmarks of my career is that I've never wanted to just be an academic. I've always wanted to be desk side with the client, coaching, supporting, driving the change in the business, having hard conversations with leadership across the business that the business might not otherwise be able to have, because I'm a third party. I enjoy that. It's fun. I think the challenge is right there. I think those skills are going to be enormously helpful and valuable. And they're softer skills. They're not the kinds of things that you just pick up off of Coursera. You don't just pick them up. There's some work you have to do on yourself, and some understandings of yourself to be able to do that effectively. And I worry that's going to be missing from what right now feels like a huge push to just skills-based hiring versus some of the softer skills or softer capabilities. And again, you'd probably expect that from a shrink, but I still think it's really important. It's been an important part of what I do.
Well, I think it's. I would agree with you in that it continues to emerge as something that looks more and more like it's not going to be replaceable anytime soon, and it also is something that we could look at any report about employee engagement, quiet quitting, satisfaction, leadership from any entity, and observe that it's a gap that every company who reports to those studies shares. We don't know how to train for that. We don't know how to select for that. We're not very good. We're pretty darn good at knowing they know how to solve the mousetrap. We're just not sure who they're going to piss off along the way, and or if the mousetrap they're trying to solve is actually the one we need to solve. And those are innovative ways that humans apply themselves that feel like they're a long way off from replication, which I'm grateful for. And I think most people should be. So those soft skills are going to continue to be important. You brought up a great point, maybe the fourth dimension to your own skill sets there. And that's, you asked some great coaching questions in the way you thought about that through the lens of, yeah, knowledge is cool and all, but like, you got to go manifest it somehow. And you probably need to lead humans and systems and processes and resources to accomplish anything with that cool new study that came out of academia. Maybe you could share a little bit about your journey through business towards performance coaching and towards driving people to do something with the cool knowledge they have, as opposed to just having neat knowledge.
Well, I think again, because I sort of come from a background where I, originally had to sort of synthesize two different, academic disciplines and apply them um, in a way that was, scientifically sound and also, legal and regulatory sound. It's a sort of natural thing for me to do. I'll give an example. I had one of the things that one of the things I think I listed in here as important to me is this sort of know thyself, and know where your gaps are, and be really brutally honest with yourself about them. I know that I am not a good project manager. I never will be. I am, you take all the concerted in the world, man, I'm still never going to be a great project manager. It's just not who I am. But I know that about myself, and I've known it for a long time. And I have, wherever possible, found a second in command to work on my team who can track that kind of stuff, and who thoroughly loves that kind of level of detail. And the exchange I make with them is, hey, if you are willing to take on this role for me, and help me stay better organized and on top of the things that I know that I should be doing, but sometimes escape my brain, I will teach you all of the soft skills that I know, and all the political skills that I know as we work forward. And then when it's time for you to move on, I'll help you find a job. It doesn't have to be here; it could be somewhere else. And I've done that probably 5 or 6 times across my career, where I've done that with really sharp mentees across time. But one of them, we were sitting in this giant meeting. We were at this giant board meeting, and we had all these marketing companies coming to present to us. And we had one come in, and they just, did this unbelievably flowery presentation. They kept going, and they kept tearing on the particular component of the website that one of my important team members worked on. And they just kept ripping on it, just kept saying, "Oh my God, it's terrible, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't work. We don't know why you're doing it." And I could see she's sitting next to me. She's getting agitated. She's getting angry. She's starting to write stuff on her pad. She's like, "How can you let them say blah, blah, blah?" And I said, "Look around the room." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Take a look." I said, "The chief marketing officer is sitting over there. And what is he doing?" She pauses for a minute. "He's drawing pictures of flowers." I'm like, "Right. He doesn't care what they just said." I said, "So they can sit here and rip on you all that you want. What you need to see is that the person with the authority to do anything about it disregards what they're saying and doesn't believe it's true. So you don't need to get mad. Let them bloviate. Let them do what they're going to do." Those are the kinds of skills that you need to pick up, and understand across time, because those are the ways that decisions get made. And if you come back defensive, or you try to intervene defensively, you're only going to break the flow here, or you're going to upset somebody else, or you're going to waste a lot of time. Take a look at who has the ability to make decisions, understand them, and absorb that, and use that as your information. And that, I remember I never thought of the room as information. The room is always information. And, the unconscious gaps of information in the room are the things that everybody throws their own personal demons into. You got to be ready for that. You got to know where your personal demons are, and you need, wherever possible, to sort of understand where theirs are.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, because you just shared, know thyself as a pretty critical fundamental component of this, and then read the room, to grossly paraphrase, right? And there's a host of ways you can develop that skill. Maybe you have a great mentor like you. Maybe you play a lot of poker. Maybe you came up
Yep.
through sales or commercialization.
Yep.
There's a bunch of paths to it. But the intersection of those, the intersection of knowing yourself enough to realize that the signal you're picking up is being enhanced because you have fear or anxiety or doubt around this area, versus you're over-indexing on that thing because you're frankly a little arrogant about this particular aspect of it. That's a difficult thing to wrestle with. The mentorship and coaching are phenomenal tools for that. But I guess, what else have you seen in your career that helps people, or maybe as a psychologist, that helps people become more comfortable combining those two data sets in meaningful and helpful ways?
I think it's, some people can do it through journaling and some sort of, structured self-reflection. That's effective. Always, finding a coach or finding a therapist, if you believe that that's the level at which you want to engage, that is always a possibility. one of the things that I've always struggled with are performance measurement systems, and for HR, your sort of your yearly evaluation, because it takes a real solid sense of your own awareness in order to write something effective about somebody else, and then coach them into saying that that's effectively a gap, and then trying to help them fill that. I think that one of the things I would love to see emerge more are systems that are focused on, okay, you as a leader have, these areas of strength and these areas of weakness. And here's how you might want to take that into account as you evaluate your teams, or as you build your teams, or as you operate your teams, and have your monthly checkpoint with yourself about, okay, so here's my strengths, here's my weaknesses, what my team's good at, here's what I'm not. Am I growing in the places I need to grow, or am I at minimum aware of and accounting for, what I'm good at and not good at? I mean, for example, I will laugh at myself with my teams and say, yeah, guys, I know I forgot that detail, or yeah, oh God, there is a meeting. You're right. Thank you. And I'm truly thankful. I'm not embarrassed. I'm like, guys, that's just not what I'm good at. I said, but I can sell whatever you can bring me if I can get in the room with the right people. And they're like, yep. I'm like, so that's what I do. And that's what you guys do. And we're both learning from each other, yeah. So now I can use all the product tools and all the project tools better than I could. But it'll never be a strength. But I think helping people truly understand that and come up with the right reflective tool, the right evaluation tool, the right approach to learning that is important. One of the most important things I ever did was take it's called Tavistock. It's very old school. It's very 60s. It's a little goofy. I thought it was goofy, but one of my supervisors thought I should do it. And Tavistock is a group process event that's 3 days long, and they never tell you why you're there.
Really hard to get corporate reimbursement on that one.
It is, and that's why. But what the most fascinating thing was, I learned more in 3 days about groups and psychology and politics and authority than I ever would have anywhere else. Because when you put a group of 60 or 70 people together 24/7 for 3 days, and you don't tell them why you're meeting, they have to come up with it on their own. They have to come up with some purpose. And you do small groups, you do individual sessions, you do big groups. Watching the madness that is, everyone else's fears and anxieties and concerns about that kind of ambiguity is an enormously powerful thing to experience. It also can unhinge some people. I mean, we've had large corporate leaders leave because they're so uncomfortable with what it's doing to them, or the way that the groups are operating, and the lack of
I'm
power.
picturing the reality television show of Tavistock at scale. It's just like, oh my gosh, no one knows the rules, no one knows how they win, no one knows what performance means.
Right. Who's going to lead, who's not going to lead, who emerges.
Talk about a way to unpack some type A personalities in a heartbeat.
But it was fascinating to do that, and to come face to face with your own stuff when somebody in the group says to you, well, why are you thinking that? That's not even happening. You're nuts. What's the deal? And then you're like, oh my God, yeah, I guess, I remember back in elementary school when this happened, and I've never let it go. And that piece, I think if you're honest about growth mindset, you go back to some of what Dweck talks about, and you can honestly assess what you're good at, what you're not, that you're willing to make those public mistakes, and willing to be someone who's a lifelong learner and an authentic learner. Those are important things for folks to be able to do. My fear is that's not rewarded in the workplace very much, necessarily, or as we used to say when I worked at Sapient for some time, and Sapient was one of the first digital agencies, and the one of the things that was constantly said around Sapient was growth solves all problems. And so, when you're growing at the rate that we were growing, you could be as eccentric and as odd and as, authoritarian or otherwise as you wanted to, because there were opportunities everywhere, and we were growing so fast that if you didn't like the team you were on, you'd just find another and you'd go do your thing. And little communities would emerge. That's wonderful when there's growth. When there's not, and there's pressure, all of the things that were, maybe quirky or eccentric before now become significant barriers or problems to growth and change. And that's where I think a growth-minded leader really is going to struggle. And that makes it hard to be that kind of authentic, understanding leader.
Yeah, up and to the right covers a lot of sins is how I've experienced that and heard it discussed. And that makes a ton of sense. Without resource constraint, your performance can be a lot more willy-nilly, and it's a little different. Go back, one of the ways to know thyself at a corporate level are a lot of the tests that are done, right? And Tavistock is a great manifestation of that in an event form, but there's everything from strength finders to CVI to Myers-Briggs. There's so many of those personality tests. And candidly, I'm a mixed bag about how I feel about the value of those. I think they tend to be a function of what you do with them. I suspect any one of those personality assessments can be leveraged in enormously powerful ways. And if you want to find out what those are, just look at the testimonials and that are showcased on any of their websites. And at the same time, in the absence of being led through what to do with them by somebody who's really effective, they're just neat data points that 6 months, 8 months, 12 months later, oh yeah, you knew that person's a EMTJ or whatever the heck they are. And that doesn't mean anything to anybody. It's never been normalized. So any insights you might share about how you've seen assessments in general, by brand or otherwise, be really valuable that people could take to heart here?
Well, I think you hit exactly on it. The value of any of those assessments. And so many of them, they don't pass muster for reliability and validity the way that a true psychometric measure does. It doesn't mean that they don't have face validity, which is what we say when, it's sort of, it feels like it maybe means something because it's so well structured or it comes together so well. And face validity, like, the placebo effect has value because it's still a social construct and we're still collectively thinking as a group about it. And so, it's how you use it. And so, if, everyone takes the Myers-Briggs, just to go back to sort of where much of this started, you take the Myers-Briggs and they all come back and say, here's the matrix of how each one of these personalities, quote unquote, interacts with each other, how they think, how they interact with each other. And here are the ways that they might miscommunicate or over-communicate. And you sort of have that matrix. And if that is something that everybody can agree on as an organized way of thinking about communications and can regularly reflect back on it, it requires that they learn it. It requires that they remember it. It requires that they understand it. It's not just a 2-hour session with whoever came in from HR. It's a commitment to, how does this tool and what we've learned from it work with us? The value in something like that isn't just the knowledge that comes from the test. It's also the interactions then that it facilitates in places where people might perceive that there's a challenge or an opportunity. And so if it's applied and made part of the broader culture and used in a valuable way, it has as much value as anything else in the workplace, if not more. But if it's, the strength finder, whatever it is, and you go look at somebody's Legos on their desk and see which color their stack is, and that somehow gives you, a deep insight into how this next conversation is going to go. That's not likely. There's enough face validity that it probably has some value, but it's, unless you guys are using the actual language of the tool and some of the sort of set insights, you're still not having a shared understanding of how to do it. And so, I think that emerges with most of them. Some of the deeper personality tests that come out of the psychometric tradition, those are enormously powerful. But the workplace is I think, in some ways, the workplace is very afraid of those because those have so much validity that they become, lawsuit tools. So, my MMPI and my Rorschach, they haven't changed since I was 17 years old in any meaningful sense. I still show up with most of the same factors and most of the same personality traits. And that's been consistent. And those tests show those kinds of consistencies. But they're not the kinds of tests that generally would be used in the workplace. The workplace is focused on performance and interpersonal often. So, then if that's the case, it needs to be an interpersonal tool used in that space, or it just ends up being, like you said, a year later, you see somebody's Legos or you see their Myers-Briggs profile and you say, oh, I guess you're one of those.
Makes sense. So let's go back a little bit, because Know thyself, critical piece of the puzzle, and being able to accurately read the scenario or the room that you're in, and the people or stakeholders or whomever they may be is important. And combining those is a valuable skill on its own. And along the way, you mentioned, as part of knowing yourself, identifying the gaps that you're never going to decide you want to overcome. You mentioned project management for yours. I can say the same thing about myself. I'm pretty damn good at a couple things, and the rest I should just be super honest and never try to pretend I'm ever going to be good at. But distinguishing that and determining, that function over there is so orthogonal to what I'm really good at that it's a drain on my entire output is not exactly easy, particularly if you aren't an entrepreneur creating your own thing all the time. Mm-hmm. If you're in a corporate environment where you may not be able to steer against that demand. So what would you recommend for somebody as they identify the skills they're not good at that maybe they do need to get good at? Or how do they get more comfortable saying, no, like I shouldn't be a PM. That's just not in my cards. How do you recommend people get there?
Yeah, it's a hard one. We are so programmed. I think particularly in the business space to say that we can perform at everything. We can do all of the skills. We can do everything that we need to do. Some of us are type A, brutally competitive people. So, we wince at the hint that we can't do something or do it well. I know that about myself. I'm early in my career. I would confront myself all the time around, oh, I can do that. And then I'd go try it and I'd realize I can't do that. And then I'd be so embarrassed that I wouldn't know how to tell somebody that I couldn't do that.
Sure.
Or that I failed.
Or God forbid you're actually good at it, right, and you make yourself good at it and you hate it and right, it kills you to do it. But now congratulations, you get to do it more.
Right. The curse of competence, the reward is you get more. And I always remind my team, hey guys, be careful.
The beatings will continue until morale improves. Is how that plays out.
So it makes me laugh that it was so hard. I think having leadership and colleagues who are willing to also have those conversations with you as part of the leadership team, and to say, hey, I'm good at this. Do you think I'm good at this? And taking their honest feedback. I think it's sometimes really hard for bosses to give that kind of honest feedback and separate it from themselves and sort of say, here's the thing you're good at. I need you to do more of it. And one of the concepts that we play with regularly on my teams is portfolio management, but your own personal portfolio management, in the sense that, what are the things in your portfolio that you can do well, and what are the things that shouldn't be in your portfolio? You might have to do them, but is there a way that you can accommodate them otherwise? So, for me, like, it's project management. That is never going to be in my portfolio as a high skill. I got to do it, but then, I will be the first to say, as I take my resources and allocate them in a portfolio, when I talk to the leadership teams around me, I'm going to put an extra bit of energy into the project management piece of my portfolio, because if I don't, I'm not going to excel at all the other things you guys need me to be good at. If I can't have the support I need there, if that means I need a little better PM, or I need a senior PM, or I need a PM with a specific SME background, I'm going to use my budget to pay for that, because I know I'll pay dividends by having somebody that good in my team, and I will ultimately achieve all my other goals so much better by doing it. And I think it was interesting. It was my portfolio guy. He's like, well, what if we just portfolio it ourselves? And that was a brilliant insight. What if you talk about the portfolio of resource allocations that are good for you and not, and then it's a language then that your colleagues ought to be able to understand. They ought to be able to follow. It's not necessarily an admission that you're, bad at this. And frankly, if you've worked with anybody for any amount of time, they're going to know you're bad at it too. There's nobody who would work with me and think that I'm a great project manager, because I'm not, and you'll see it immediately. And so, that I think there's, if you can be honest about it and have a honest conversation, and then allocate your portfolio of resources for doing it. Again, you heard me say before, I generally have a sort of second in command chief of staff person wherever I can, whose job it is to keep track of some of the things that I know I'm likely to drop or miss, because my mind is racing at the problem solving and the application side, and not at the, oh, what are the logistics and structural requirements to make this happen? I think, but that's hard. I think it takes an environment that supports that. It takes a personality and awareness that supports that. It takes some ego and some super ego to do that. And I think, we know that sometimes the kinds of behaviors that are rewarded from a performance standpoint in a business, or that, get rewarded with, some of the incentive structures, are not always the ones that are going to be able to sustain a business, or to sustain, people feeling like it's a good place to work, or it's a place that they're comfortable. It's going to attract people who are, rough and tumble and work hard against each other. That, in some industries, that's perfectly fine. On some sales teams, it's a great way for them to work, and everybody knows those are the rules, and that works. Yeah. But in other places, it would destroy somebody who otherwise might be a great performer.
Yeah, I've never thought of it as that personal portfolio, right? But the way you're describing it, like, what are you good at that you can do well, and you should do those, and what are you bad at that you don't do well and don't want to and shouldn't? Okay, that's good to know. And then everything in between is the gray area where we get to figure out, am I going to invest in that skill because it aligns with the right incentives, or is that just a gray area that I'm never going to fill? And there's always going to be an enormous number of gray areas. There has to be. There's too many functions you could perform. I've never thought of it that way. Years ago, I was reading Blue Ocean Strategy, and I liked a lot of things about that book. But the visual, if you can visualize the way you chart, the differentiation of service A versus service B, company A versus company B, right? Southwest Airlines versus United was one of the examples that they have in the book. I had that insight of, what if you mapped yourself that way? And what are the rare and valuable differentiating factors that you can identify and intentionally steer into to, turn those, to put yourself into blue ocean scenarios? And so that aligns really well with that framework. That's a cool way to think about it. Going back to our conversation about AI and the application of it, this is one of the areas that I'm pretty passionate about, because there are so many applications of AI today that are built around efficiency gains, as we kind of touched on earlier, right? You can gain time, margin. There are benefits to that, and those are great. And automation and creation, data analysis, those are great. That's fine. Thinking partners, sure, like put those to use. But the number one application of AI that I think exists is leveling up people and unlocking, shortening the time to value, increasing the speed with which somebody can skill up in a particular function they didn't have before. And we're seeing this manifest in business. I mean, there's write-ups about companies that do 30 million in ARR with 15 people because they have a lethal team of digital ninjas who are just really dangerous generalists. They don't have JDs. They don't have doctorates or PhDs. What they have is functional nimbleness across multiple skill sets in a business environment that allows them to be dangerous enough to create their own tools and solve problems. And that's a really different way of thinking about scaling something. But it also seems to be emerging as a real value. Powerful generalists as opposed to siloed specialists. What are your thoughts about that emerging dynamic in the business world?
Well, it's that gap is certainly closing. The research that we've seen out of the consulting space, which is where I've spent a lot of time looking at AI efficiency gains and the future, quote unquote, of consulting. So the phenomenon you talked about, upskilling people who are less skilled or early in their careers, or who are less familiar with the subject matter space or the application, absolutely.
Crossing into a new sphere, right. age aside, just doing something.
We're seeing that dramatically happen. It can rapidly bring competence and understanding up in a group of people, to where they know 80% or more of what they need to know. What's interesting is that we don't see that sort of a gain for people who are SMEs, who are complex problem solvers, who are consultants. We see a much smaller efficiency gain. We see, somewhere between 15 to 25% of an efficiency gain, and there's not a lot of real thoughtful research about why that's the case. But it certainly seems to be consistent across a couple of different studies now, where they've looked at consultants and others in an organization and how they use the tools. And I think it goes back, in my own mind, to some of what we talked about early on, and that is this unique capability to problem solve in complex spaces that requires some creativity. It requires, a large set of generalist skills applied with a knowledge of the end result. I think all of those things make it easier for folks to level up from the bottom than it is from folks at the top to improve. And that, I think that's going to really create some challenges, because your banding, if you think in an HR process, your banding is going to disappear or change in some very significant ways pretty rapidly. You're going to have an enormously large set of two central distributions in your bell chart. And everyone's going to, sort of kind of know the same things or be able to apply themselves to the same things. Is that good or bad? I think it could cut both ways depending on how you apply it. But that still leads to, efficiency gains and effectiveness. But it also, what I worry about is how much of that homogenizes stuff. Is that what's going to emerge? Is that we're all going to, the chat conversations, the chat data is all going to sort of level everybody out, and we're all going to see the same solutions. We're all going to get the same suggestions. We're all going to get the same results from a single research query. And then where does the creativity come? Then who's turning out anything unique and novel? Where does innovation come from in a space like that? I don't know. Is it innovation in process? I mean, the thing we played a lot with in my last role as I was wrapping it up, and some of what I'm trying to write a bit now is, it's really operating model change. You really need to fundamentally change the operating model of your business to take advantage of AI. That is enormously hard. We saw that with digital transformation. We saw it with Internet 1.0, 2.0. I mean, that kind of change to any human enterprise, any human system is enormously hard.
And the more entrenched or further down the road you are on any aspect of your business, the more lift, just at an organizational change level, not even considering process, investment, resource, whatever else might be involved in that. That's interesting to hear, though, that the data that you've seen, I'm mostly verbally processing right now, the data that you've seen shows that the deeper your subject matter expertise, the diminishing return of the application of AI tools today.
Yes.
Is that a fair way to say it?
Yes. So I'll use myself as an example. We were a Google shop, so I'm most familiar and have probably had the most experience, and most of my certifications and trainings have been on some of the Google tools and Gemini. I have Gemini tuned now from the deep research perspective, that 90% of what I can get back in a research report is accurate and is stuff I can rely on. And if I combine that with a tool that mimics my writing style, I can turn out a bolus of research that's pretty solid and sounds like me and is easily usable as a starting point. The problem is a research report doesn't solve the problem that I'm being asked by the client. It's like step one in my effort. And so for that, it saves me a bunch of hours and time and effort at the beginning, but I still have to go through it. I still have to synthesize it. I still have to apply it. And that's where I think if you have a job where you're supposed to make value out of results that come from that kind of stuff, it's a harder slog right now.
And that makes a lot of sense from something we've seen as well, and that's that there's these 4 common applications of AI, and 2 of them, creation and data assessment. In the process of creating something, or in the process of analyzing data, you develop an intimacy with the process you use to get there. And what happens is you spark ideas or questions or narratives or connections. But if instead you leap from giant data set to accurate distillation of data set, you skip the intimacy and the connection that might actually tell the underlying story that's more meaningful than the outcome itself. And so that can be helpful. And at the same time, depending on what you were trying to accomplish and what your scope is, it might actually undermine you to not have to take those hours. And so to look at it from it used to take me 10 hours to analyze this, and now it takes me 1, but then I have to look at that data and work backwards to find the underlying stories, and it takes me 6 more hours. Well, it's not a 90% gain you just experienced. Right. It might be 30%. And frankly, that 30% might piss you off more than it would have to work through the data in a more organic, thoughtful way, which as a leader if you're ever trying to rally consensus around decisions, if you're ever trying to bring people along and manifest buy-in, people need to witness the journey far more than the giant leap to an outcome. And that can lead to giant problems if people are using it that way. That's interesting. That's validating.
Well, and I think, we as a species will never not process data as narrative. It is so fundamental to the way that we've made meaning from the time that we could make meaning that will never go away. We constantly need to tell ourselves a story with a beginning, middle, and end that has some logic or some emotion or some value that carries through, and we'll always do that. And we had a consultant roundtable with my team just before I left this last role, and one of the things we talked about was, again, the future of consulting is, somebody of my mature age, we'll just say that, and has had experience in this space. I can conceptualize the hypothesis and the result that would solve for a problem because I have solved for that problem or some version of it endlessly across my career. Give your 10,000 hours, whatever you want to say. It's a thing that comes with the experience. What happens when there's a generation of next consultants who've never done had that kind of experience? Are they going to be able to generate the right hypothesis and conceptualize the right output, or conceptualize a novel or unique or alternative output that would deliver something different? That is a fear across my team is, okay, right now it's great. We're going to see the young folks come along and they're going to develop faster. Their research skills are going to happen faster. We can bill for less hours. Great. But then when these folks make it to the mid-tier in consulting or they make it to senior in consulting, and a client comes to them with a complex problem, are they going to be able to sort of tell a narrative story and articulate a research and result and delivery arc that a client can be confident in as part of the story? Because they won't have experiential data points to point to. They can't say, and so I was standing there with, the senator, and the senator was saying things, and it was ludicrous, and I had to find a way to politely say, I'm a scientist, and here's how, and learn that skill. I mean, you don't have that, and you haven't figured out how to do that, or how are you going to be able to convince and persuade, or even just figure out what the right application of AI is down the road? And then, are we going to get back to that middle of the space, where everything's the same and there's no creativity and there's no innovation and there's no next level innovation results? I don't know.
Yeah, I have that fear as well. And you're not the first to articulate it. I've done a podcast episode on it and written about this, that the looming talent glut is the way I've thought about it, in the sense that if you zoom out a little bit on an individual company and you start to assess an industry, each company each entity in that industry needs a mechanism by which they advance people's skillful contribution in that industry. There needs to be a machine that's consistently leveling up and generating new skillful application of the familiar puzzle pieces, the shapes of the problems that need to be solved. And whether that's that you're excellent at training or hiring and developing or both or not, you have to have a solution like that to survive as a company. And so if we fast forward a little ways, and what you've got are no one who's lived through that talent pipeline, that is going to cause a lot of harm in particular industries, which will trickle down to particular companies. And at the same time, I have a lot of hope and optimism based on one of the companies that I run, that there is a way to train a lot of that and shorten that time to knowledge and time to skill. And perhaps it doesn't take 30 years of somebody doing those things to generate that familiarity. Maybe there's a way to synthetically replicate that degree of learning, but that's not manifested yet. What do you think about the ability for AI to help solve the very problem it creates in that way?
Don't know. I've played some with again, I'll go back to Google because it's the tools I'm most familiar with. Some of the generate a podcast or generate an exchange tools or generate learning tools using tools like Notebook. I I think maybe I'm biased because I'm a subject matter expert at what I do, that the tools and things that come out of that are not helpful to me in sort of, taking a bolus of knowledge and giving me back something different than what I already know, or helping me learn it any faster than I would learn it in ways that I'm most familiar with. Um, that I don't know. And I think some of it may be a problem. Some of the problem may be in the fact that, really LLMs are just, giant prediction tools. And they're predicting where language
Totally.
is going, or what was meant, or what was tried to be communicated based on probabilities. And I don't think, I think there's going to be a gap there. Do I think that some of the agentic tools and agentic concepts could solve for some of that? Yes, because then you're going to have you can pull different rule sets together in different ways, and manage what goes in and what goes out of the agentic system in a way that, you could leave a gap and tell someone, hey, I need you to learn how to fill this, or hey, here's an area in this effort or in this process that needs you to think about it. Here's how the rest of it works. Here's how it could all be combined together. What are your thoughts on making it better, or on combining it, or acquiring the skills you need to close or understand it? But I wouldn't want to be a professor right now, or be someone working in the educational space, because I don't know what you create, and how you help solve for that kind of gap that we just talked about. How you solve for something experiential that gives someone what they need to recognize gaps, to recognize solutions, to recognize a unique result, or to conceptualize a novel result, or an innovation result. I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't. I'm struggling with it, and I have a junior in college who is struggling with it as she tries to figure out where AI fits in her educational journey, and what does she need to know or not know as she goes forward into the career space in 2 years. And I'll be fair and say that the universities don't have a lot of guidance for students right now either. They're as lost as we are.
How could they? It'd be pure speculation. My daughters are 6 and 9, so I'm a little further out. So I think they'll have the benefit of a little bit more maturation of this technology prior to investing significant time in a particular relevant skill set or something. But I've definitely thought about like that. What in the hell is the value of the average or most college degrees or training programs in a decade when my oldest is just emerging into college? Boy, I have no idea. And I got a lot of empathy for you as a dad, but her as a young adult trying to go, wait, hold on. Everything I thought would be valuable 4 years ago is got a big asterisk next to it. That's not fair to say. It's not everything. To your point, there are some things that are likely to remain incredibly valuable. Human to human ability to influence, to convey, to convince, to persuade, to articulate, to find meaning, to tell the narrative out of those skills seem valuable.
Yes.
In certain applications, but they've got to be applied vertically somewhere.
She's a particularly gifted writer. She's a particularly gifted visual artist. And she's also like an unbelievably good gamer. How my daughter ever became so good at first person shooters, I don't know, but and the abuse she takes from young men online is amazing. But she's fantastic at it, and
I can only
it's a gift. And she's really good. But she loves the story games. And one of the things that I remember as she was going into college, she's like, "You know what, Dad? I want to be a showrunner for a video game." I mean, was that a job that any of us would have thought about? No, but really, it's a production of a movie, of an engaged effort that tells a story and has all these different components to it, and has the same production values, and what a fascinating thing. And the ones that grab you are the ones that still have that sort of interpersonal story layer. Fallout, which is now the big Amazon. She's been a player since forever, and she's very good, and she creates in it, and she gets how you would put together that kind of a conversation and tell a compelling story about something so human. She gets the branding and the marketing. She gets all of that sort of instinctively. And there's a value there where I worry less about her because she writes so well. She creates visually so well, and she conveys that so well. That is going to be an important skill. How you call that a job, or what job description you look for that, I don't know. But I think it's emerging, and it will continue to emerge as we continue to build. We continue to put lots and lots of content together with AI, but that has to have some interpersonal, and it can't be uncanny valley, or it's not going to get picked up and used and be valued.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. I was reminded earlier this year by a mentor of what the definition of economics is. As we talked, because this is a conversation. I run 2 AI-based businesses, and so this is a hot topic of trying to figure out a lot of answers to these questions. And he goes, "Look, his degree's in economics, and I'm probably going to butcher this, so nobody beat me up too much about it." Because look, the economics is the science of the reallocation of rare resources.
Yeah.
That's what it is. We are in a period of rapid reallocation of what is rare, and getting a good sense of like the rare and valuable skills that will remain rare and valuable is pretty tough. We don't have magic 8 balls that are really accurate about that right now. And yet at the same time, like that's the game. It's been the game since you were figuring out how to get joint degrees that would serve you. And it's going to be the game for my kids. But getting better at understanding the signal of what's rare and valuable is what's kind of a question right now. And that gives me a little bit of comfort. I'm pretty confident we'll continue to create markets like highly narrative video games that turn into massive multi-billion-dollar television shows that create a lot of jobs out of what could be nowhere, that are going to keep myself and my daughters and yours employed along the way. As we run out of time a little bit, I had Bruce Vojak on recently. Bruce is a multi-author on and a world leading expert on innovation in mature markets, and not necessarily cutting edge technology, cutting edge of enterprise or startups or AI, but in mature industries and mature businesses, how does innovation manifest? And one of the takeaways I had from that is his perspective was find a problem that you're interested in and a little bit about and pursue that. That's what really good innovators do. And so you have reinvented yourself multiple times. You've got all these overlapping skills and experiences. What are the problems you're interested in trying to solve and know a little bit about?
And I think that wisdom will always lead someone to the right places, because it pulls their humanity, their authenticity, their excitement, their energy into solving for something that's unique and different. And one of my current side hustles is my wife is a very prominent clinical psychologist, and we operate a psychology practice here in Northern Virginia, where we are. And for historical reasons, we have a particular focus and affinity for neurodiverse kids. So kids who are somewhere on the autism spectrum. And because we're here in Northern Virginia, which most people don't know is sort of Silicon East, there are 690 data centers in my county alone, which is the largest single concentration of data centers.
Yeah,
so we over-index for folks in the IT space, which means, for better or worse, we over-index for kids who are on the spectrum, because that tends to follow with parents who come in that industry, because you're very successful often in that industry if you're neurodiverse. And so, but the celebration of that level of thinking that's so diverse and so different, I think, is an important piece of making difference in the future. Again, I worry that AI is going to make us all sort of think so similarly, or give us similar outputs or similar results, if we don't pay attention to the ways that we need to make it unique, or we need to put a human stamp on it. I think some of the folks who just think utterly differently about the world are going to have tremendous value, because they're going to see patterns that we don't see. They're going to recognize ways of thinking and understanding the world that we don't, or they're going to ask questions that the rest of us have become so numb to that we can't ask them. And as uncomfortable as it might be, they're going to ask them, and we're going to have to think hard about, maybe that is an innovation. Maybe that is something we should be thinking differently about. You're right. I think of waste management finally figuring out that all they needed to do was come up with a big plastic bag they could put at Home Depot, and attach an application to it where you could just put it in your front yard, you could fill it up, and then you could use the application to pay somebody to come get it. You don't need to go hire somebody to, put one of the big metal things in your yard. You just, boom. I mean, okay, that is a mature industry.
Yeah, right.
None of, what could be more mature than waste management? And yet here's an innovation that it made perfect sense once you saw it.
Your comment about seeing patterns other people don't see as a gift that someone who's neurodiverse may have. Again, I was checking my notes real quick from that Bruce Vojak conversation. That's the other thing that that innovators really do, is they see patterns other people don't see, and they pursue those doggedly and turn them into a problem they want to solve. It's pretty interesting. So I want to ask you, like, specifically, because you're at this cusp of figuring out, like, what's the next adventure. Is there a particular problem that you're passionate about or want to solve, or a pattern you're seeing that you feel like applying?
This is probably a combination of where I'm at with both my side hustle and what I'm coming out of in the consulting space. Is the conversation right now about AI and companionship, whatever that is, whether it's AI companionship, of a romantic kind, of a fantasy kind, of a therapist kind. The amount of activity that folks are engaged in with any of those tools around that sort of conversation it's staggering. And I don't think there's been any good thinking yet, or appropriate protections or otherwise in place about what's the best way to use that. I remember when I started with telehealth back in the 90s, and all of my therapy colleagues saying, there is no way you can do psychotherapy over the wire. That you are an absolute blasphemer. You're not of the true cloth. How could you ever say that this was a thing we could do? We hate you. We're going to fight you. You're not. And all I could think of was, oh my God, I got a 90-year-old woman who's got dementia, and she needs to talk to somebody at Mayo about what they can do. And it's 42 degrees below zero, and she can't move.
Right.
We're going to solve that problem. And is it going to be perfect? No, but it's going to solve. And that, I think, doggedly saying to myself, no, there is a way to do this right. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to do it, but I think it's important to keep going, or we're never going to know exactly where the boundaries are. I think giving people to believe that is important. And so for me, it's, I really want to spend some time understanding that. I want to be able to talk to that on behalf of the broader clinical community. I want to be able to talk to some of the leaders here that I work with politically in Virginia. And I also want to help large businesses, really middle and small, really middle-sized businesses who are not so entrenched that they can't change, but have enough resources that they can spend some time and money and effort to really figure out what their operating model is, what their change model is for using AI in a valuable way. And that, picking up the fractional hours to support that, or building some of the frameworks that are in my head, but not on the page, about how to do that based on all the things that I've done over the years. And also, I think just to celebrate a little bit that I have the opportunity to recreate again, and to get excited about it, and to realize that, it's an important part of being the kind of professional that I think it's important to be. And that, wherever I can encourage that with the mentoring that I continue to do and the coaching that I continue to do is really important. So I don't have a vector yet. I'm still back to making it up in a different way. I think what's different at this point in my career is that I'm confident I'll figure it out. And I panicked all the other times. The first time I was laid off, I panicked like I can't believe. And there was only the one time I got laid off, but it freaked me out. And so, that way I've taken a different approach to my career, but I'm not afraid when the bottom drops out, that there isn't some way to come back and, weave that pastiche, weave that net back together. So we'll see where it takes me. But my encouragement to anyone who, feels like the bottoms are dropping out, think about your core skills, think about your unique value proposition, build your portfolio of what you're good at, what you're not, and take that to market using technology, using systems to overcome your deficits and magnify your strengths, and you'll succeed.
I think that's a solid message. You have those rare and valuable skills, and it sounds like you've got your head on straight around the opportunity that you're embracing, not looking at it any other way. Dr. David Nickelson, thank you so much for taking this time. If somebody wanted to connect with you, what would be the best way for somebody to do so?
Well, because of history, again, you can see the gray hair. I was LinkedIn user 50,001.
Wow.
So I have been on there a long time. It's an easy place to find me. Dr. D. Nickelson. And Dr. D. Nickelson at gmail.com are the easiest places to find me. Again, my age is given away because there's no numbers after either of those. I signed up early, right? It's all good. But that's probably the best place to find me. And I welcome contacts and connections with folks, both for the mentoring perspective, the coaching perspective, and advisory and consulting work. I would love to have the opportunity to expand my network and continue to have communications. And thank you for this opportunity, because your intellectual curiosity and your willingness to drive a program like this, I just think it's wonderful. And I wish I had the energy and courage to do it the way you have. It's a beautiful thing. So thank you for the opportunity to participate.
My pleasure. What a fun conversation. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week. Don't forget to take a second and subscribe. Maybe even share this episode with somebody it made you think of, or someone you think would take some value from it. This show is all about uncovering the brilliance and humanity of high performers. And whether those performers have a massive following, or a podcast, or a book, or they're a business owner, or they're buried somewhere in a corporation, or maybe they're a nonprofit leader, or they don't necessarily have to have a title. I'm really fascinated by people who are passionate and who are doing interesting things. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or send me an email at hello@languageofleadership.io to make that connection. I'll see you next week.